Welcome to the Education Innovators Podcast. I'm Eric Byron, and it is my privilege to host this show where I get to talk to folks from all over the world who are education thought leaders and innovators. We'll hear inspiring stories from educators, EdTech founders, AI experts, and others who are fearlessly innovating and delivering unique learning experiences. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started.
But the architecture is really what is determining the flow and current of the river. So when we talk about architecture, I don't mean the architecture of a building, although building design and learning environment design is part of that architecture. I'm talking about all of the systems and processes and rewards and punishments and metrics which kind of surround the learning environment.
Adrian Ireland is the author of Designing Different, a new architecture for learning. And this is now one of my favorite books on what education could look like if we can get past trying to make it better and accept that education needs to be different in the 21st century. So stop swimming against the current and listen to Adrian tell us what we might be able to do to redesign the system and its architecture. Keep listening. Welcome. I'm Eric Byron. This is the Education Innovators Podcast, and I am very excited about the guest I've got on the show today. I'm going to introduce Adrian Ireland. He is an international educator, systems thinker, and author dedicated to reimagining the architecture of learning. With extensive experience teaching and leading across Asia and Europe, Adrian has spent his career challenging the traditional standardized models of education by championing learner-centered approaches that value individuality, curiosity, and creativity. Rooted in both practical classroom experience and deep understanding of educational theory, Adrian believes that the future of learning lies not in small improvements, but in daring to create something fundamentally different. You're going to hear that word a lot. His work blends system thinking with human-centered design principles, helping schools and organizations shift towards environments that foster authentic engagement and personal growth. In his book, Designing Different, a new architecture for learning, Adrian shares the lessons, insights, and strategies gathered from years of navigating the complexity of educational reform, inspiring others to move beyond better and design the future of learning. So I'm so excited about having this conversation with you, Adrian. I haven't quite finished the book, I have to admit, because I've been taking my time. I've taken all these notes and going out and looking stuff up and, reference points. And I have read a bunch of books like this, I have to admit. And I will say this one is one of my favorites now already. You've done a really, really good job of articulating this kind of need, I think, and, where we can go, right? Because this is a lot of people proclaim the problems without really offering solutions. But I really like your approach in the book. So thanks and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. It's amazing to be here, and I'm glad you enjoyed the book, and kind of having these very deep, nerdy, educational conversations is a top 5 experience for me. So I'm excited to dive in.
Okay, good. I like to go deep. I don't do shallow conversations here. So we're going to poke and pull and see what we can get to in terms of the real meat of this topic. So, all right. So first, I love that the book is centered around systems thinking. I come from an IT background, and this is something I preached, and I taught computer science classes. I was always talking about you need to have systems thinking and understand whole systems. And so you really center this book around systems thinking and systems design. But then you say, education has an architectural problem. So let's just kind of start there. Can you describe or elaborate a little bit on what you mean and what needs to be done to re-architect education?
Yeah, well, I think we can start with a little bit of a dichotomy. So often we think some parts of education have an effort problem, but in my experience, there is not a lack of effort. You see a lot of parents, teachers, students really working very hard to try to succeed within the system. A useful analogy I use is thinking of a river and all of these actors kind of in the river trying to swim, exerting a lot of effort to move, but the river is flowing in the wrong direction. So they're exerting a lot of energy. Some are moving backwards, some are moving nowhere at all, some are inching forward. But the architecture is really what is determining the flow and current of the river. So when we talk about architecture, I don't mean the architecture of a building, although building design and learning environment design is part of that architecture. I'm talking about all of the systems and processes and rewards and punishments and metrics which kind of surround the learning environment. And I think sometimes we put a lot on the teacher to correct a lot of these things when a lot of these battles are already lost at the systems level, which is one reason why I've been very interested in educational leadership. I still teach in the classroom as part of my job, which I think is important to stay grounded. But these kind of bigger systems level curriculum design, I mean, we'll touch on a lot of these things, but they matter a lot.
Yeah. Well, I do love that analogy of I can picture these teachers swimming against the current here, right? That, as you say, it's not for lack of effort. I think there's a lot of teachers trying really, really hard in a system that seems to be working against them. So that does make sense. But how do you then change the current, right? How do you change that architecture so these wonderful teachers who are doing the best they can don't feel like they're going against the stream?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reason that systems thinking is so valuable is because without seeing all the interconnectedness, you often can try to move one piece of the system, and because of kind of the inertia of the rest of the connections, it can pull that piece back. I think another useful analogy is like activation energy. If you think of something like chemistry or biology, where you kind of need to get over this hump to kind of get to a new state, or else you'll just revert back to the original state.
Mm.
So when, I mean, a great example that I've seen happen in schools, not maybe thinking about that interconnectedness as much, is schools which have pushes to reduce the emphasis on grades or to try to eliminate them altogether. I mean, there is like a very large body of research on how grades are damaging and over reliance on extrinsic motivation is bad and all the Alfie Kohn work and along these lines. And that's all true. Also, you can't remove that piece of the puzzle without making a lot of other system adjustments to make intrinsic motivation able to fill that void. So you get a lot of what I call, I don't think I coined this term, but a false fail. This idea of a good idea implemented incorrectly into a system which kind of rejects it. So that's one of the reasons why I think we need to kind of view architectures as a whole. So, and it's difficult, right? Because we can only deal with so much change at one time, right? So there's a tendency to want to do these incremental tweaks, and we'll probably touch on some of what I call the rules of reality later on in the conversation, or some of these first principles of design, which I think help to set a foundation to guide us in the right direction.
Yeah. So one of the things that I also think about too is kind of how did we get here, right? If the architecture's wrong, the architecture hasn't really changed in a long time. Schools have been
Mm-hmm.
operating this way really, since the 1600s. In the industrialization period, we were teaching kids, basically we started schooling kids in a standardized way to prepare them to work in manufacturing, right, in industry. And we've kind of continued to do this all along. Classrooms with, you know, right, rectangular classrooms with rectangular desks and students all lined up in rows and sitting there told to be quiet and listen. And this is very demotivating, as we kind of know now. So is the problem that the the river started flowing in the wrong direction, or did the landscape just change, right? Is it that the environment has changed? Why is this architectural problem exist now? Why is now the time to fix it when it's been like this since the 1600s?
Yeah, well, I would agree it's been very pervasive, right? And like any large bureaucratic system, it's a bit sticky and it's hard to change. And there's a lot of things which are cementing us in place a little bit, a large one being university and college admissions requirements, which are shifting right now, which I think is a very big reason to kind of capitalize on that opportunity. We'll talk a little bit later in the conversation, hopefully, about metrics and the power of metrics and what you're defining. But there's a lot of great work with organizations like Mastery Transcript Consortium, MTC, Redesign Use, Future 9 competencies, America Succeeds Durable Skills, all of these kind of trying to shift what we value, what we measure, and what we present to universities, which is a big factor in opening up space for designing something like I'm advocating for in the book.
Yeah.
But there's just a lot of real and I would say imagined forces. Towards the end of the book, I have this kind of dichotomy between what I call gravity, which are the real forces which are keeping us stuck in place. You should not ignore them. Things like standardized tests, curriculum requirements, financial constraints, all of these things are very real. But we also have a large bag of what I call cement shoes. So kind of things which we might think are gravity. They're definitely keeping us stuck in place, but they are a little bit more self-imposed, and not for bad reasons, but things like our identity. We get linked to a certain way of doing things. We have comfort in being competent in what we do, even if what we do is not ideal from a learning perspective. Most people don't want to become beginners again 20 years into their careers. So there are a lot of forces keeping us stuck in place. But what I've found is that a very powerful lever for change is opening up kind of these sandbox type spaces where people can experience a different architecture. It's not like your entire school jumps to 100% of your time is in that space. Like we have project week that I run at the end of our school year. It's last week in June. So reports are in, grades are in. In a lot of schools, this is kind of where the school year dies a slow death into the summer. And so we've reclaimed that time. We take all kids off timetable. I help teachers co-design 25 to 30 different projects that students then sign up for, things from cooking and baking to mini Ironman triathlons to web design, app design. And it's really amazing what people bring into that space. You know, people you're like teaches French and they're offering like a comic book design workshop, and you find out that they have this amazing passion for comics. So really it's about making space, creating places where you can sample different architectures with different kind of motivational structures. You kind of have to experience it to believe it, right? Because it's easy to be kind of dismiss it as too difficult.
Yeah. I think in the book you refer to a startup week event thing, right? Where you let the kids try and come up with entrepreneurial ideas. But I believe the part of what you kind of highlight there is the kids comment that they learned so much doing that week that was outside of the normal content delivery mechanisms, the architecture, right? They were doing something different, even though the activity wasn't really designed to deliver content. The kids said they learned more content even while they were doing that than they would in a typical week sitting in their structured classrooms.
Yeah, I mean, startup week is my favorite week of the school year. I hope it's the kids too. It's kind of my baby. I've run it for around 5 or 6 years now. And yeah, it's really been one of my main testing grounds for some of the ideas in the book. what works, what doesn't. How do you get kids kind of authentically enrolled? How do you set up teaming structures and curricular structures where the concept I call in the book is mutuality. So they are authentically reliant on one another, which I think is something which is often missing in learning design. We have like collaborative projects, which one student could do the whole thing by themselves if they wanted to. And so I've kind of tested a lot of these ideas in that setting. And when the most interesting thing is when students come in to a very new environment, it takes a little adjustment time, but probably only like a day and a half. And I give students a lot of autonomy over groupings. So these are grade 9 students. I do some screening. I'm not like totally naive to the reality of the situation, but I just remember in my second year running the program, I had a group of 6 boys who were on a team, and I was running it through some of the like grade 9 year head and other teachers, and every single one of them was like, you can't do this. This is going to be a disaster. You can't put these kids together. You're asking for it. Day 2, they all showed up in suits. Day 5, they were ranked top 3 in the entire competition out of 21 groups. So I think we need to be careful of how we prejudge students, because sometimes how they're behaving is more a result of the environment that they're in versus what they're actually capable of.
Yeah. No, that's an awesome story. And well, I'm a big fan of these kind of active learning environments, project-based learning. I've done, multiple episodes of the show around those themes and games-based learning. And I know you talk a little bit about games, but I want to touch on this because you talk about the rules of the game, right? And how we measure. And so, I thought of this also in the context you were talking about the college entry, requirements, right? And so in order to advance from high school to college, you've got to play the game. Right. And so high school tends to be structured in some ways simply to get you to that next level. It's not about what you learn in high school. It's about your ability to go to college, right? So they play the game. But if the colleges are starting to change the way they're doing acceptance, then the rules are changing, which means the game is changing. So talk to me a little bit about that. What are you seeing there that's really pretty fundamental that could help facilitate some of this change?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I outline in the book is that the metrics that we set the rules of the game. So whenever you're setting something that you're measuring, some endpoints, something that's important, people are going to play games around those metrics. They're going to try to win. They're going to maybe do shortcuts. And it's all very logical. Like if you think of cheating from a student perspective, actually, a lot of cheating is rational given the system that they're in, right? They don't actually care very much about what they're doing, but they care about the outcome in some cases. And so cheating becomes something that feels logical to them. Obviously, I'm not advocating for cheating, just a bit of empathy for how that emerges. But yeah, when you have more flexible metrics, which is something I talk a little bit about, one of kind of the core design principles of designing different. What you do is you open up a lot of different pathways to winning the game. And it's not that we should say students, like it's bad that they're playing the quote unquote game of school. Like I think that's always going to be the case, but we need to be very cognizant. Like, are they playing games worth playing, right? Is it
Right.
a game worth playing, which is also leading to these other outcomes that we want? And I know there's big pushes around in some areas of the educational discussion around free schools and kind of getting away with all standardized measures of anything, and kids can do projects and follow their passions, which is a nice vision, but I don't feel that's scalable. I don't think that's going to be a reality for education as a whole, because we need certain standardized measures, because whether we like it or not, one purpose of education is sorting and figuring out kind of kids' strengths and weaknesses and shape, and then articulating that in a way that universities or employers can understand. But what we don't need to do is get so granular with what we're standardizing that we end up driving everyone to have the same experience. So it's very different if you have a success metric around creative thinking or conflict, navigating conflict or networking versus a standard around understanding trends in the periodic table. The standard around understanding trends in the periodic table is going to drive educators to give everyone almost the same learning experience. It'll have variations, right? But it's a bit more narrow, it's locked down. Whereas these other kind of broader metrics, even though they're a little bit harder to measure, they lead to a lot more variety of path to get there.
Yeah. What's an example of one of these other things we might measure?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at things like, I mean, there's a lot of amazing competency frameworks in development, right? So, and these are broad ranging from even things into the character range, like resilience. I mean, in the IB system, we have this list of what we call ATL skills, which are kind of these foundational skills which help students drive their own learning, things like research skills, self-management skills, media literacy. And a lot of that kind of falls backwards in our system. Like it's not the emphasis. But I think in a more flexible system, skill sets like that would not be the icing on the cake, they would be the cake. And that would be kind of the goal. And we would be a little bit less stringent about what context you are learning creative thinking in, because that's restrictive and breaks some of the rules of reality or the first principles when we're really confining the what of what students are learning. And we get much clearer on how they're learning, how we are documenting skill development. And yeah, I mean, I think some of the most important work in education right now is happening with some of those players like Mastery Transcript and Future 9 competencies, because without changing the goalpost, it's very hard to move the rest of the system.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. So this reminds me, I've had this conversation on a few podcasts, but I'd love to get your take on it. So measuring curiosity. So you bring up curiosity quite a bit. It was even in your little bio that I read. And I absolutely believe that, curiosity is a key to success here. That, when you see students, and so for me, it's what I call the difference between a push and a pull, right? So a
Mm-hmm.
push is, I'm going to tell you what you need to learn and I'm going to lecture you on it and then I'm going to test you, right? I you didn't ask for it, but I pushed this knowledge on you and told you you need to know it, versus curiosity, which is the pull. This is the student asking questions, the student wanting to know, wanting to learn, right? So we want our systems to encourage curiosity, right? Seek knowledge instead of me having to force it on you. But how do you measure curiosity?
Yeah, it's a challenging conversation, and there are frameworks out there which attempt to do this. And obviously, something as amorphous as curiosity is sometimes hard to place. And there's also this distinction between, like you said, push and pull. Sometimes the outcome we're seeking is not something you get at directly, if that makes sense. Like it's something which emerges from the architecture or the learning design itself. I mean, I see this a lot in how students approach things like, or how schools approach things like well-being. Well-being is actually a global thing which emerges from system design and learning experience design and doesn't just live in a separate well-being curriculum. But a
Right.
lot of times we curriculumatize things and we're like, no, like well-being is, we're going to make a curriculum, we're going to deliver well-being to you, which when you say it like that sounds a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
Whereas like actually you would be fostering well-being if you gave students great elective choices and great student driven clubs where they can find community and things like this, which are more inherent to how you're designing the overall system than a curriculum you're delivering. But to get back to your question on curiosity, there probably are certain metrics which are too difficult to measure accurately. And that's something that the people doing this work are looking at. They're like, how do you validate? How do you back up with evidence? How do you have a standard without being too confining, right? Without making everyone try to approach it in the same way. And so it's a bit of a tension, but I think we also need to acknowledge what we're comparing it to, right? I think sometimes we are like, oh, we can't do that because it's not very accurate. Well, what we're currently measuring has a lot of inaccuracy
Yeah,
as well. We've just normalized that and learned to live with it.
right.
And I think the benefit of some of these new competency systems of measurement is that you can allow kids to build what they call a jagged profile, right? Something which actually shows their unique shape, their unique strengths and skill sets, which universities ultimately want because they right now have no way to distinguish people from each other, right? Everyone who applies to Harvard just has straight A's in all their classes. Like, what does that do for them, right? So
Right,
they're
right.
looking for more differentiation.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I actually made an attempt at measuring curiosity in my ed tech startup here in Hong Kong. And we were doing a coding boot camp thing, and it was just one of those things we knew was important and we wanted to try and figure out. And exactly what you're saying is is the reality we kind of were hit with, that it's so subjective. And even though we kind of did this rubric around, we're looking for these kind of examples or behaviors to be demonstrated, being consistent and fair in the way that was scored was really, really hard. I mean, even getting one instructor to do it the same way across all of his students and to recognize it, when it's occurring fairly and consistently, but to get two instructors to do it based on the same criteria and see it the same way was almost impossible. And
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
a
I
it's a
think
great
there's
thought,
there's
but hard to
also
execute.
yeah,
Yes.
no, there's interesting work in kind of creating these digital learning records or digital learning wallets where it's actually housing a little bit more of the output or work, right? Because I think especially with things like artificial intelligence, which can maybe make kind of diverse portfolios more understandable in a more simple kind of condensed way, I would imagine in the future showing what you can actually do through work product is going to become more important. Like that's already how it
Mhm.
works in the computer science coding world, right?
Yeah.
Nobody cares about your degree. It's like, show me what you can do. And like when you think about it in that context, like curiosity maybe isn't directly measured, but it is evident because very curious people will produce higher quality work products in
Yeah.
that domain. So it's sometimes it's less explicit and more kind of tangential to to what you're looking at.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, I think so. For me, part of the answer here is giving people an opportunity to be curious and then seeing what they do, right? Do they demonstrate curiosity in a situation where, I've kind of, so I think you call them like areas of opportunity or zones of opportunity or something, right? So you kind of set up an environment where they can go seek, right? They can
Mm-hmm.
pick an
Yeah.
area of interest and go explore it. And to me, right, those are opportunities for curiosity to emerge. And then you can
Yeah.
observe some students will be really curious and go tearing in there, you know, well, look, just pop the cover off everything and explore it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Others will be more timid and, and it's not wrong. It's just, can I kind of observe that and make a point of observing it, I guess is my thing. Even if I don't have a perfect metric, a perfect way to quantify that, at least I can observe and learn from how do I really do this. I may think I've created an environment that spawns curiosity and the kids aren't really responding to it, right? So I've got to observe and learn and keep trying and experimenting, kind of like your 1 week thing, right? I'm sure you've gone through multiple iterations and tried different things and been surprised by some of what you've seen happen there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's related to this feature of Different Outline, which is called like create spaces of possibility.
That's what it was.
And it also relates to autonomy in a way, right? So I think sometimes we equate autonomy with choice, which is not that they're totally unrelated, but it's a little bit too simplistic of a link.
Let's take a quick commercial break here. I want to plug the human intelligence movement, as I always do on this show. This is not a paid advertisement. I'm just a fan. The mission of the human intelligence movement is to ensure that students have the skills to thrive and succeed in an AI world. The work they're doing is important. You should get involved. So I've got a link in the show notes. Click on that, see if you can be part of the movement. All right, now back to my conversation with Adrian Ireland as we figure out how to take off those cement shoes and change the rules of the game.
I like to think of autonomy as a perception of control, right? So a student or say like an athlete going to a volleyball practice, I coach a lot of volleyball, and my practice might be very like regimented and very locked down, but actually that student still is experiencing high autonomy because they opted into that experience. They have shared goals. They want to be there. They feel in control. Whereas a student in, say, a grade 9 humanities class doing a project on something that they don't care about, and the student or the teacher gives 4 different options for how you can demonstrate your learning, is still going to feel in a low autonomy state, right? Because regardless of, helps a little bit, right? It's not insignificant, but it's not really solving the core of the problem. That some of the battle with autonomy is lost before the kid even enters your classroom, right? There's a limit to what you
They
can
didn't
do.
choose to be in your classroom. Right. They were assigned your
Exactly.
classroom. Exactly. So you're already in a deficit. And I do love that. Again, this is part of why I really liked your book, because you have these great kind of examples or explaining kind of the way our brains work and our motivations work. And this was one in particular that I thought was very, very good. And I haven't seen anybody else explain it quite this way on autonomy and about that. It's the big choices that really matter. If I get to make the big choices, yeah, I'll suffer all day with some of the minor stuff because I put myself in that situation. I chose to be there. And so I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
see, I think coaches do have a bit more of a nuanced understanding of this because they often teach the same kids that they coach, and they'll have a student on their basketball team who's putting in like 3 hours of work every day and super dedicated, and then falling asleep and failing their science class. And it's
Yep.
this kind of like tension, like, how is this the same person? Like,
Right.
how can these two things coexist? And that leads to interesting questions.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Speaking of questions. All right.
Hmm.
I'm going to read this. I pulled this right out of your book, and so I'm just going to read it, and then we can talk about it. So,
Yeah, of
um,
course.
so you're talking about grades here, and so quote: grades significantly reduce interest in learning. Grades compel students to choose less challenging tasks. Grades promote surface level as opposed to deep learning. So this is pretty, kind of slap in the face to the current systems and architecture, which are all based around grades. So talk to me a little bit about, you're not pulling any punches here. Grades are bad, but this is fundamental. How do you get away from grades?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give credit to Alfie Kohn for a lot of that work. This is straight from his work in his book, Punished by Rewards,
Mm,
which is a great read
yes.
for anyone who hasn't read it. But yeah, grades are problematic because they make the goal not the learning itself, if that makes sense. So
Yep.
they are an extrinsic motivator the goal is totally disconnected from the actual experience. The goal is not growth or skill development. And that's why things like cheating become logical because those two things are divorced. I mean, in younger years, I see a lot of schools through grade 4 or 5 just do away with them completely. And I think that's not a bad decision. I think often younger, what we would call the PYP or elementary school, has a little bit better architecture for intrinsic motivation. There's funnily like autonomy and agency often goes down as you get older, when you would think the opposite would be true. You'd be more able to handle responsibility and choices. But yeah, to do away with them at the higher grades is difficult because parents expect them, because universities expect them. But the best thing you can do is make the grade or whatever metric is marked be very closely linked to the skill development and learning experiences you want, right? This is why having kind of the outcome as a competency levels of skill development make students play a better game, if you will, because yeah, they're going to play the game of, oh, like I want to get really good at like critical thinking, but then it's like, tricked you, that's what I wanted anyways. So it's kind of aligning these two things.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I had the founder of Atari, Nolan Bushnell, was on the show.
Mm.
So he wrote a book on the future of education, but he kind of famously, I think he was the first guest on the show who used the phrase "no grades, no grades." So for him, it was a combination of no grade levels, so no year 1, year 2,
Mm.
kind of time boxing of your educational evolution, right? But no grades, right? No scoring summative, you know, you got an A and
Yeah.
you got a B, and even though that B might have been really good for you, you feel bad about it because somebody else got an A, right? And it's very
Yeah, I mean
comparative,
it's
competitive.
even what you're
Yeah,
like what you're measuring, right? Like if like what a different environment it would be if instead of measuring your ability on some fixed absolute standard, we just measured your growth and we
right.
just reported on your growth.
Yeah,
And it
yep,
was not, so it's like, how much did you grow? Because I mean, like you said, when you're sitting in an age box, if you're old for your age or you're exceptionally good at math or science, and that's just how your brain works, like you'll be getting top grades with zero effort or very little effort and
yep.
not growing at all. So is that success? Like that doesn't sound very successful. Whereas a student who started very low and made it to the middle, I would say that student's being more successful, but that's not what's reported, right?
Yeah,
And as far as the like mixing of ages, I 100% agree that it's a big missed opportunity. A lot of the most powerful learning experiences I see is in electives with mixed age groups, because you not only have the choice-based element of opting into the elective, but you have this very natural leadership progression where the older students have been in the elective before. Take something like elective theater, where they run performances.
mm,
So you start as a grade 6 student, you have kind of like lower level roles, you're getting to know the program. The grade 8 student is maybe doing the star role in the musical or play. You see that, you're like, I want to be that person. You work very hard, and then you're kind of mentoring the people below you, and it just makes a much more sustainable structure. Like if you think about it from a learning design perspective, it makes no sense to have every single person come in fresh and not know anything about what's going on at the start of every year, right?
yep.
If half of
Preaching to
your
the
class
choir. Yeah,
already knew, then it'd be like, oh, now you can take leadership of upskilling these people. Just puts a huge burden on the teacher to kind of start from scratch every year.
yeah, yeah. No, are you familiar with the Montessori system?
Yeah, probably not as well as you are, but
Well,
a little bit.
I did a show on that too. I had somebody on and I went and visited a Montessori school, but that's very much a no grades, no grades kind of thing, right? Each student is kind of measured on growth and their progress that they're making in certain areas. And it also allows a lot of autonomy because they set up the environment. The idea is that it's not just free for all, learn whatever you want. They kind of set up the environment. So the environment is controlled, but within that environment, you decide what am I going to do now? Right. And for how long do I want to do this? Till I get bored. Okay, now I'll go over here. But you also have that mixed age group thing going on where I may be sitting there, doing my little thing over here, but I see somebody else doing something, that catches my attention over there. Maybe if I'm
Yeah.
not shy, right? I just get up and go over there, right? They're working on something and say, hey, can you show me what you're doing? This seems interesting to me. And so you enable all of those dynamics. And I'm not saying I'm promoting Montessori necessarily, but it's over 100 years. Montessori's
Mhm.
been in existence, and that system is out there. There's something like 15,000 Montessori schools in 100 and something countries, but it's all private. And well, it's not all private. It's mostly private schools. But Jeff Bezos was a Montessori kid. He came up
Uh,
through Montessori schools, which brings us to another point, because even though they don't issue those standardized grades, their record for getting kids into college is actually very good.
mhm.
They
Yeah, I think people
yeah,
people would be surprised how many avenues there are into university and colleges, especially in the United States. Other places are a little more restrictive, but
yeah.
I mean the whole idea of the Montessori, the concept of like freedom within structure, whether
Mhm.
it's in a Montessori setting or another setting, is a very powerful learning architecture, right? To set kind of very strict and well understood parameters, but then allow a lot of freedom and movement and how people combine and how they move. Because it's not really responsible to just give full freedom, because you're going to have too much discrepancy and you're going to have people
Yeah.
really, the floor is too low. Some kids might do very well. I mean, a good example of this, I like to give shout out to work that I like, is Avenues World School. Have you heard of them?
No.
So I think they're predominantly an online school, but they have a lot of other physical campuses. I think they have one in Shenzhen, but they created something called the World Elements. So it looks like a periodic table, but instead of atoms, it's different learning experience elements. Some of it's like content driven, a lot of it's more competency driven, like things like creativity or other things that they've defined what they mean by these things. And then they're moving in a direction where at the later years, students can propose their own learning experiences and projects, but they have to be justified and kind of with these different elements. So, what elements are you stacking together? What are your outcomes?
Hmm.
So that they're kind of speaking a common language, but they're also kind of an infinite diversity of learning experiences is possible. It kind of relates to the concept in the book, what I write about, called simplexity. So this idea of simple systems which can handle complex realities. Another good example is something like the English alphabet, right? I mean, you live in Hong Kong, so you see English, also things like Cantonese and Mandarin, very different architectures of language, right?
Hmm.
Which I find fascinating. And so if you look at something like English is very, or Germanic, or just the actual alphabet is very simplex. It's basically in English 26 elements of the system, which you can combine in different ways to represent like hundreds of thousands of things, right?
Hmm.
Whereas in something like Mandarin or Cantonese, it's not very simplex. It's complexity representing complexity, where
Yeah.
students have to memorize tens of thousands of unique symbols, right? So I think when we're designing learning architectures, we need to keep that design principle in mind, right? Simplexity, because we do live in complex realities, but we can't implement complex systems very well.
Hmm. Interesting. Another thing that popped in my head too, as you were talking there, I got thinking about video game design, right? Of course, I
Mm.
got some experience in the game industry, and one of the things that you tend to do there. So you were talking about kind of this kind of controlled environment, right? I put certain elements in there, but I don't dictate how you go experience them or learn, right? And great game design is actually kind of like that. The designer puts elements in the game for you to discover. I don't tell you explicitly why they're there or what you should do with them. And then it's also part of the design process and, you know, having people play the game and kind of seeing what they do and tweaking the design, right, to kind of get them to go do the thing you really want them to do without explicitly telling them, to do it.
It's a
So,
little more subtle.
yeah, great game design is exactly that. It's subtle. It doesn't dictate how you play the game. It kind of gives you the tools, gives you some visual cues, right? Maybe
Mhm.
sound and whatever, and then yeah, let you go. Which is another distinction I find too. And I do love game-based learning, which is also why Nolan Bushnell was on my show because his whole book is about game-based learning. But one of the things that is a challenge for traditional standardized education is it's very sequential. I have this scaffolding and you learn this and then you learn this and then you learn this and you do this in grade one or year one and you do this in year two. And whereas game-based learning is typically not very sequential, right? I've kind of set this world out there and go and explore and you encounter different things and you're absolutely learning as you go, but you're learning not in a dictated sequence. And sometimes you kind of get ahead of yourself and realize, oh, I've kind of hit a wall. I can't progress. I can't level up because there's some things
Mhm.
I missed and I got to backtrack and I go back and I explore and try to find the things I missed that fill in the gap that get me to level up, right?
I mean, I
Yeah.
when you're talking about that, it makes me think back to metrics, right? So like if in systems that are very driven by content standards and conceptual understandings, you tend to design into that linear approach, right? Because it's just a number of content or concepts that we need to get kids through. But if you shift that goalpost to being more skills and competency focused, then something like iterative learning design makes more sense, right? The context is not as important and you just loop back and repeat because the process is the outcome.
Exactly. Yes.
And then you're so by iterating, you're not going backwards or slowing down, you're getting another chance to practice
Mm.
skills. And I think we don't highlight enough iteration in schools because we feel so much pressure to get kids through. But they would learn much more deeply if they did a science experiment and then had to do it again and then had to do it again
Yeah.
to
Or
refine
chose
and
to do it
often
again.
or chose to do it again. Yeah,
Even better,
even
right?
better.
Yes. Yes. If we can get them to choose. So, well, I'm looking at this. We're already at almost an hour, and I haven't even asked half the questions I was going to ask. And you sent me a whole list of wonderful questions. We didn't get very much into some of the kind of practical advice for teachers and wanting to do this. So let's take a couple minutes and talk to me a little bit about that. So how I'm a teacher out there, I'm listening to this. It all sounds great, but I'm feeling both gravity and I know I'm wearing some concrete boots here. How do I break free? How do I get started?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is I have a lot of empathy for that situation. And I think there are certain contexts where some of the ideas in this book might be out of reach. And that's just a fact. Like I teach in grade 11, 12 in the IB called the diploma program. And yeah, it's high stakes. Kids are writing big external tests. We're on a program and some of this stuff goes out the window, not all of it, but kind of know your contextual situation. And then I would also say to try to make some sandboxes, some spaces where you can safely experiment with different pedagogical models, because it does feel like a risk, right? You don't want to mess up a kid's future or hurt their university prospects, but there's always some space, whether it's the week before Christmas break, whether it's the final week of the school year, try to find those sandboxes where you can get confident in designing different types of architecture in kind of a low stakes environment, and then bring that confidence back into some of the core learning experiences. But it does take iteration, right? And you don't want to jump all in and change everything in the first three iterations don't go very well, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing would be to find your people. it's it's hard work. It's difficult to do it alone. And I have never been to any school where there's not a solid pocket of entrepreneurial minded teachers who want to experiment, who want to do things differently, who are not satisfied with the status quo. That will also be the case in your school. Find those people, learn from each other, iterate, create frameworks, make things better. And then when it's ready, bring others in.
Yeah. Sorry. The other thought that occurs to me, and I've seen some great examples of this, is multidisciplinary coursework, right? So when you get that like-minded person, and I teach history and you teach science, let's put our brains together and propose something that's a collaboration between our two courses, right? So you get credit for both history and science, but we put the two classes together for part of the semester or whatever, and we do a project that touches on both things.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I've taught in some fully interdisciplinary courses between science and design. We have another one between science and humanities. And I mean, there's a few really big benefits in trying to structure yourself like that. Some of it requires leadership involvement because your schedules need to mesh and you need proper spaces to run between. So it takes a bit of foreplanning. But one, it's amazing professional development, the best you can ever get, working closely with someone from another discipline. My background science, I know so much design now. I know how to use tools I would have never known how to use because of that collaboration. And the second is that it really makes pedagogies like project or problem-based learning more tenable, a much better fit, because the issue you have in a purely disciplinary setting is that you say, okay, a really cool project idea. We're going to look at solutions to like infant mortality rates in like this part of the world and designing things, solutions to that. And what you find is it's never going to neatly fit in your disciplinary bucket because it's a complex real issue that spans disciplines. And then what you end up doing is you ask yourself, well, can I justify spending like 50% of my time not teaching science or not teaching design? And probably the answer is no, I have things I need to get through, right? So when you pair up with another subject, it makes those kind of real complex topics more accessible, and it feels like you have time to properly approach them. So it is, like you said, it's a powerful architectural shift that you can make.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just listening to another podcast from the human intelligence movement yesterday, and they had an example on there of that just sounded awesome. It was a multidisciplinary one, and it was PE, science, and I've forgotten what the third one was, but they took them rafting. So these kids went out and did river rafting, but part of the whole experience was learning about the biology, ecology of the river, and they were getting this physical activity, so they got PE credits for it, and it just sounded brilliant. And of course, the students loved it. They spent almost half their time out in nature when they were doing this experience, this multidisciplinary experience, but they got credits across 3 different areas for participating in it. So cool. Well, what else have you got? Anything that I didn't cover that you were really hoping we would talk about?
Yeah, I think we've covered a good amount. I guess if I was to give like one final takeaway, it would be if I could shift how people view education kind of worldwide, it would be to get away from this idea that some students are lazy and some students are motivated and some students have the potential to be successful and some students don't. Because in reality, all there is students who are lucky enough to have a really good fit with their environment and with the architecture. And even those students don't come out unscathed because sometimes they're playing the wrong game. And then you have another set of students who are unlucky and they have a bad fit with their environment. And the really sad part of it, the part that frustrates me, keeps me up at night sometimes, is that if you've kind of been squeezed into an environment that doesn't fit your shape per se, over time, I've seen a lot of those students feel like they're dysfunctional, like there's something wrong with them, and they internalize that instead of realizing that actually there's something wrong with the environment that they're in for them, not for everyone, but for them. And you see this all the time. You see people who are absolutely miserable in high school, they graduate and there's more niches, more opportunities available after, and then they thrive and they make like $100 million business. So it's not like we don't know this is the case, but kind of putting that failure on the student is not only damaging, it's irresponsible. And we, as teachers, but especially as leadership in schools who have ownership over that architecture, need to take responsibility for that.
Yeah. Well, I'm a case in point. I barely got through high school. I mean, I escaped, took a year off afterwards. I was so bummed out on education, didn't want any of it. And later, right, I ended up with 4 different degrees and pretty much a 4.0 GPA through all of them. I was an excellent student later in life, and some of that was autonomy, right? I chose those degree programs. I put myself in that situation. I wanted to succeed. And so I did. And so, yes, it's also partly why I'm on this program I'm on, right? Why I'm seeking people who are trying to create a better fit for more students. And so I think, what you're doing is wonderful. Say your book is really, really well written, and I'm encouraging everybody to get a copy and read it. We barely scratched the surface in this conversation. Hopefully, we've come out with just enough teasers and kind of thought, makes people go, what's he really talking about there? I want to go read this book and figure it out. So I hope that people do that. And I hope that you continue to, find schools and teachers and pockets that, we can implement these things in, because every experiment we run, we learn from, and it gets better, and more people open their eyes and go, oh, there is another way. We can change the architecture. We can break those concrete shoes and step away. And just really quick, there was a parable that just kept popping in my head as we were talking. I read this parable many, many years ago. I was coming out of high school, I guess. It was in a book. I can't even remember the name of the book. Jonathan Siegel, something like that. Anyway, the parable is of a river and these creatures that cling to the rocks, and they cling to the rocks and the water rushes by them, and this is their life. And then one of them says, I trust the current. I want to let go. And all the other creatures say, no, 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 you're good. That river you love is going to thrash you against the rocks, and you're going to die. Don't let go. But he finally lets go. And of course, the current picks him up and he flows down the river. Well, now the creatures downstream who are clinging to the rocks look up and they see him flying, and it's a miracle, right? And they're all in awe of this guy, and he's just waving at him, going, "No, no, it's okay. You can let go. You can let go. You can trust the current." So anyway, I think we've got a lot of educators out there who are clinging to the rocks right now, holding on for dear life. AI is creating all this havoc, and they don't know what to do, and they don't have the training, and the students all know more about it than they do. You know, cling harder, right? They're white knuckling it. And so I'm hoping that this show inspires more teachers to let go. Yeah, break free
Yeah,
and change the mold. Yeah, change the rules of the game. Yes.
very well said, Eric. Very
Yeah.
well said.
All right. Well, this has been awesome, and we will definitely stay in touch. I will let you know when I've got this ready to publish and get it out there. Well, thank you,
All right.
Adrian, and hopefully, we'll talk soon.
Yeah, hopefully. See you, Eric.
All right. Thanks. All right, that was powerful stuff from Adrian Ireland as he gives us just a taste of what's in his book, Designing Different, the uh, a blah, blah, blah. Designing Different, a new architecture for learning. So find your people and start building those sandboxes so you can test potential new architectures. You don't have to get it right on the first try. Iterate. As Adrian points out, the problem is not with a lack of effort in education or even a failure on the part of teachers, right? The system itself is flawed and it's out of date, right? It needs to be different. So we need to use system thinking and we need to change the rules. Be brave. Maybe it's time for the system to change instead of making the students conform to the system. All right. I'm Eric Byron. Thanks for listening to the Education Innovators podcast. Please subscribe and share. And to all those education innovators out there, thanks for doing what you do. You are making a difference.